Hi, everybody. Hi,
Man,
Sarah.
talking about the Zoom seasons, I was today years old when I learned that you could pre-make the breakout rooms. I didn't even know you could see them in advance. I'm still learning the technology, the irony.
It's perpetual, it's never ending. It evolves faster than we can keep up, so.
I think we're missing Alex. If she is in, let me find her and move her over. And my school does not allow us to use Zoom at all. So I feel I've missed out so many different things. So I only learned it through Girls Who Conduct, as my colleagues would tell me, okay, you should do this. This is a new feature and all that. We'll start in a minute while people are still kind of joining in. And if you want to type in the chat to tell us where you're coming from and say hi, or things that you want to ask about technology or arts in general, or our path as musicians, music makers. So, and then we'll get started in just a minute. Great, we have people. Tiffany from Winnipeg. Natalie is in near DC, North Dakota. I am in Taiwan, which is 2:30 a.m. in the morning. Long Island, New York, Kalamazoo, Clinton, South California, Virginia. All these awesome people here. Let me take, yeah. We'll give Caitlin another minute. We have, I think, still like a handful of people not in Zooms yet. So while we do that, I'll just introduce myself. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the we're the fourth panel discussion. I got confused. We're the fourth panel discussion of this symposium weekend. My name is Chaowen Ting, and I'm the founder of Girls Who Conduct, and I'm really honored to be joined by a lot of wonderful colleagues through my journey with Girls Who Conduct, and also during this weekend. So we will get started. So our theme today is about arts and technology, and that has never been so pressing in our career since, because of the pandemic, that we're all suddenly forced to be home and to be behind screens a lot instead of being in rehearsal rooms or in practice rooms. And we are running our programs, teaching our students through trying out various devices and the programs to see what would work best and not. So we'll start the session by asking our panelists to just briefly introduce yourself, tell us kind of how you get where you are, anything that you want to share with the community here. So we'll start with Alex.
Hi. Good. Hello, everybody. I'm coming to you from San Juan Island, Washington, which is about 100 miles north up the coast from Seattle and right across the way from Vancouver, British Columbia, which I can almost see from here. As you can see behind me, I'm a composer who is probably best known for her electroacoustic pieces for large ensembles. And I have a blast doing it. I've been working with electronics since I was about 15 and pretty steadily. And I'm 59 and a half now. So that's a lot of wires and a lot of cabling. And it's also been very cool to watch the entire music industry shift into the digital world. You know, I'm that hump generation that started from the analog to the digital. Anyway, I really look forward to this conversation because in addition to talking about, you know, the music making with technology, and, you know, as Chaowen said before, we are now completely connected online and for the foreseeable future, including this in our world. And I've been doing this for over a decade, long before the pandemic. So I have a lot to say about it. Thank you.
Sorry, Sarah.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me here today. There's so much about what Alex was just saying that I echo in terms of the technology being so prevalent in the music industry right now and how important it is to embrace that. But we'll get to that momentarily, I'm sure. So hello, everyone. I'm Sarah Fernández. I'm currently serving as artistic director and music director of a 501c3 not-for-profit community band. That's a mouthful. Called the Manhattan Wind Ensemble. They're based in New York City. I'm actually, just in addition to that, a K-6 general music and chorus teacher on Long Island. So covering two very, very polar opposite sides of the music ed spectrum, if you will. But I'm super eager to be here, and I feel like arts and technology can really go in so many different directions. So I'm really eager to hear what you're curious to discuss and learn about. And I'm also just eager to hear more about what my colleagues are going to share as well. So thank you again for having me. And I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Sarah. And Natalie?
Yeah, I mean, again, they've already said so many great things. So echoing all the things, my journey has been as a professional clarinetist. So I did my bachelor's, master's in clarinet performance. Then I took a break and did an MBA instead, where my focus was market research and data analytics. So I kind of went that techie side of things, and then finished up my doctorate at the University of Maryland recently. But at the tail end of that, I was making it, I guess, as a performer, and then the pandemic happened. So it was a hard and fast pivot, and I ended up, I was approached, asked if I wanted to be an audio editor for a Baltimore-based classical music recording company called Arts Laureate. And I said, well, I know nothing about audio technology or recording engineering, but I would love to learn. I'd be more than happy to. And they said, that's fine, you can just learn on the job. So I've gone from knowing, in the past, I knew how to just like put things into Audacity and just trim it up and denoise, like enough to put my own recordings on my website. But I've gone from that to now being the go-to editor for the Los Angeles Master Chorale, and doing works like for the President's Own Marine Band and Pacific Chorale and other really big name groups through my work at Arts Laureate. So I say that to say anybody can do it. Anybody can navigate the technologies and learn the Zooms and all of the things. So it's kind of a strange path. Technology hasn't been a huge part of my life really up till now, but I've definitely took it to the deep end with as far as what I could do where I was a year ago and where I am now.
Great, thank you, Natalie. And before we start our conversation, just one housekeeping thing. So Tanya here with the name Girls Who Conduct would be our handler for all questions. So if you have specific questions that you want to ask any panelist, you can just send it directly to her. But feel free to share any thoughts, ideas, resources anytime through chat. And I just put our symposium program where if you want to read bios or get to the panelist websites and all that, or look at all the other awesome events that we have planned for this weekend. Great. So I forgot to mention that aside from being a conductor and running Girls Who Conduct, I also have a day job that I conduct orchestras at Georgia Institute of Technology in Atlanta, Georgia. And that was actually a prerequisite when I interviewed for my job, is to find ways to integrate technology into music making, because that's the tech school and we don't have music majors except for music technology majors. So we only offer degrees in music technology instead of performance or education. But I have to admit that I don't know much about technology until just now, like Natalie said, like when we're forced into that. So I think one thing that we as the organizing committee really wanted to bring out of this session is, yes, we know we've experienced so much, we've learned so much in this past 14 months, but what do we learn? What are important things that we want to carry on, like post-pandemic, when we go back to the new normal? What are the great things about this journey that we've learned that we'll probably start there. So like kind of something that you see that can be continuing implemented in your student teaching, in your studio, or in your ensemble. I know, Alex, you ran several symposiums and master classes about that. So we'll start with you since you have all the cool things around.
Ta-da, here are all the cool things. This is a great way to start. And I want to start with something that came to me that I ended up doing this year that was very game-changing for the way I thought about working with ensembles, and I think for the way a lot of band directors and orchestral directors thought about it, which is in the second or third week of March. You know, I'm in Washington State. This is where the pandemic, actually, the shutdown started. This is where we had the first hit. And I got a call out of the blue from the director of bands at UW, Timothy Saltzman, great guy. And he and I did not know each other at all, other than reputation. And he contacted me because he knew I was kind of techie. You know, I guess I had that reputation. And he said, I've got all these orchestra and band students that I have to see through the end of June, you know, through the semester. And I don't know what to do with them. I want to keep them playing their instruments. I want to keep them connected to each other. And somehow I think composing is in there somewhere. And can you think about this with me? And so we brainstormed a little bit, you know, on the phone. I got off the phone and I came up just from my own experience doing this for so long and knowing what works terribly, what doesn't work over the internet. Like we have no synchronous audio, right? We all know that. But what works really well. And there is a level of connectivity that works superbly, and not to mention file sharing and other things. And I thought about it. I came up with a syllabus called Putting the E in Ensemble. And I sent it to him, a number of pages of lesson plans and ideas, et cetera, thinking, well, maybe he'll use one or two things out of this. And the University of Washington ended up doing the entire thing, hook, line, and sinker. I consulted on it. And what it is a way to get all these remote instrumentalists. None of them were composers, or certainly wouldn't have considered themselves so. And what they did was they all came up, they were broken down into small groups, because you can't have, you know, a large group doing this together. It's much more intimate and connective for them to be in small groups. They all wrote for their own instrument a small, short 15-second motif. They recorded it, so they were learning those skills too. Then they uploaded it, and in their sound team, they all shared each other's motifs, dumped them into Audacity or any DAW, and started composing and made these amazing pieces that got more and more complicated as each lesson went. And they were learning, you know, form and development, motivic development. They were learning harmony, the power of vertical harmony, all these things, right? That you want as a conductor, you want your ensemble to hear these things in the music that they're playing, but never before had they had a chance to actually been asked to do it themselves. And it floored us what they were coming up with. I ended up overseeing this with about 30 different universities and some high schools around the country, and this past year. And it's been mind-blowing to me to see what we always knew, is that all of these instrumentalists who play are also composers. Anybody can be a composer. I mean, it's just like what Natalie was saying. I love what you said. I was really inspired when you said, you know, a year ago, I didn't know my ass from my elbow when it came to, you know, audio editing. And now look at me. And I think that is so awesome. And this is what I've been saying, you know, as a composer, I've been saying for the longest time to instrumentalists, everybody can compose. Everybody. If you're a good player, you hear music, you understand it. So this was a way to tie it into the base of the question of going forward out of the pandemic. What do we see? What I see, and what I've been told by countless band directors and orchestral directors who did this with their students, is that even going forward, what they realized that they never had a chance to do when they were so focused on rehearsal and preparing for the next concert, is that they never took the time to get the students directly involved in creativity, not just recreating sound, but creating it. And by doing so, understanding the form of all music. It's building an affinity for music. When you ask a player to get inside of the process, they'll never look at a piece of music that they play the same way again. So I see this going forward as part and parcel of an ongoing curriculum. And I know that a number of schools are going to be doing that.
Am I permitted to piggyback off of that? So Alex, I so much of that resonates with me strongly, not only as a band conductor, but also as an elementary music educator. One of the cornerstones of my curriculum development with even the young children was to just get them writing, composing. And it doesn't necessarily require that they know how to play all their scales on the violin or know how to pick up a recorder and put the correct finger combinations down. But through various things such as Notefly, Soundtrap, all of these really incredible technology resources that we have available, really anybody can write music. And I say that in meaning like anybody can express themselves musically and creatively. And a lot of these tools really allow for that. And I'm talking like 5 and 6 year olds, like, and all the way up through adulthood. We maybe didn't have the opportunity to do that as much in our elementary music education. And as an adult, I like can spend so many hours on Incredibox, it's not even funny. Like just making up all these different beat patterns, and it's a lot of pre-recorded stuff, but it's, if I'm going to be on the train for 15 minutes, that's me creating music. And, my students really deserve the same access to that, that avenue for creativity. So, Alex, I really appreciate you saying that.
Yeah, all this talk of curriculum makes me think, one of the reasons I had even learned even a little bit about recording is I just needed to be able to record myself because I was a poor student and I couldn't afford to have a professional audio engineer come and do all my recitals. And so I still have my Zoom H4n recorder that I got in high school, and I've used it to record so many concerts, and that's most of the material that I edited. But I always felt like, that the music career track in many schools does not include enough curriculum-based teaching that sets you up for the real world. Because the real world is, if you don't have the money to do it yourself, you're a performer, so you're not going to. So just live with that. You need to know how to do all of this yourself, and you need to teach yourself how to do it. So that was like my journey with any technology. It was learning from necessity and really budget. Like, I can't afford to pay somebody to do it, so I'll learn to do it. And I've been saying for years, I feel like, that we have to incorporate these things into our music performance or conducting or whatever curriculum of teaching people real world business skills, this being one of them. So I feel like one positive effect of this year will be forcing people to consider the fact that they do need to build these real life skills into the curriculum and have even a music technology minor available. I know the University of Maryland, when I was exploring, this is actually even before the pandemic, but I was trying to learn more about audio engineering and I was like, okay, well, where can I take a class? Is there a Mac lab I can go to and mess around? They had nothing. They don't have any kind of program or even a minor. And I just felt like, well, this is something I want to teach myself. And there's the internet for sure, but the context of classical music recording is very different from 95% of what you'll find online, just because it's mostly pop industry focused and very different. And it's kind of like, every dude with an iPhone thinks he should run a podcast and show you a YouTube video about how to record in the industry. So it was hard to filter what is reputable, what is legitimate, and what will actually be helpful to me. So I am really optimistic that going forward, people will feel like we have to incorporate this into our curriculum. And this generation of people who are getting bachelor's and master's, whatever degrees right now, they're going to be really well equipped to teach people for the future. And there's not trying to be ageist or anything, but there is just a divide in general of how many faculty that I've encountered who even now, still can barely turn on Zoom. And I'm not trying to disparage them or anything, but the reality is we're going to have to be able to do all of these things. So teaching everybody that kind of baseline skill of doing it. And also it teaches you how to have agency and critique yourself the same way you review your conducting videos or review performances of yourself or whatever else, so that you can get better. And that once you graduate and you don't have somebody in a private lesson saying, do it this way, you have the tools to teach yourself and to think critically about what you would do differently, why, and then how to implement that. That was kind of long-winded, but that's what I think about it.
So I do want to come back to what Alex and Sarah said, because incorporating that creativity part into Ensemble is actually a kind of shifting in repertoire. in a way, because we, as you say, that we've been so focused on like preparing for a performance, because that's what the conductor's primary job, in a sense. Okay, our job is to have a great ensemble, have a great band, and great choir, then we sound great at the next concert, and then we move on to the project, as opposed to, okay, we're kind of actively learning. But I wanted to pause, just kind of leave the thoughts here. Coming back to what Natalie just said, I think like two things here. One is our music school and conservatory curriculum had been so focused on the mastering of the arts. Like our teachers focus on how you produce great sound on your instrument, how you sing better. While their generation, it's both a generational thing and also like a business had changed, because now it's pre-screening is so common. Like when I started applying for conducting schools, a video wasn't required for most of the schools because it was so hard to get a video. But now it's like, just like you have to sound good, you have to look good on the video. While now students applying for any job, you have to have a really nice sounding recording of yourself. So like Natalie, like you said, a lot of people feel overwhelmed, because like you say, there are so many YouTube videos and there are so many free programs and apps, and they could create this sound. They can make changes to the pitch, make changes to the, I had a students that just make the, one of the etude much faster because he couldn't play it fast enough up to tempo. So he tweaked it. So he said, and he told me, oh, the requirement was that the recording can only be within 10 minutes. And I played it for 11. So I made it into 9:45. I was like, no, but I will give him credit for creativity. I was like, no, you don't send this for audition. But so I just want to kind of get back to Natalie. So like for people just feeling overwhelmed, like where do you advise to get started? What kind of like budget equipment, like recorder that is reliable and things, you would suggest?
Yeah, this will sound really strange, probably, given my highly technical role and being on a tech panel. But in general, I think people tend to be a little bit too preoccupied with what gear they need, or what's the newest thing they should buy, or whatever. You know, for the work we do at Arts Laureate, and I've done hundreds of projects by now, I would say probably 85% of people just record on their cell phones. Now, granted, we're putting them all together in a group, so you aren't going to hear those individual problems so much. But this is sort of tangential. I have mixed feelings about advising anybody to go buy a new thing or do a new thing, because that kind of also reveals like this history of elitism in classical music. And the pandemic disproportionately affected people who already didn't have access to those things and can't afford to have the best internet and live in a home now with everybody home where they might only have one device to share. And so I'm all about, and if you're a poor student too, I'm all about use what you have, get the cheapest thing available. I think the Zoom devices, I mean, I've used them a lot, but anything that's in the realm of like $150 to $300, you can probably get by with something that's not even the best microphone, but the things that are more important when you're trying to get a great, well, I'll say audio quality for now. I think it's more important to have a good space. So one that doesn't have a lot of white noise going on, even that you might not be hearing, but that will be captured in the audio recording. And when you turn up your gain, are you going to hear the air conditioning or the refrigerator or your chirping fire alarm or not fire alarm, smoke alarm in the background? So there's that, and also just your mic placement. I think a lot of people think, oh, I just have my phone and it's going to sound bad no matter what. I'm like, no, you need to test it out. For Arts Laureate in particular, I've done probably about 20 presentations by now for our clients. So organizations and schools and nonprofits, teaching people how to prepare for their recording for Arts Laureate specifically, but it's all concepts to apply at a broader level. And like, you were saying about audition requirements, I always tell people, what we're talking about today is in the context of making your Arts Laureate recording, but this is something that will help you make recordings for private lessons, for juries, for orchestral auditions where you have to play down the full rep list, anything like that. The concepts are still the same. So I I tell you, just use the cheapest gear that you have. But you were saying something earlier about, students editing and editing. I think, especially from the audio editing perspective, it's really easy to over edit. And it's really easy to just feel like, well, there is so much technology available. I should be using all of it. So I should pitch correct every single note. I should time stretch everything that was just a smidge off. I should do those things. And it's a slippery slope, because at the end of the day, the best sounding everything will always be the best bass take, the same as if you were performing it live and that was your only shot. You should still approach recording as if it's your only shot with that kind of preparation. In my presentations, I talk about the art of practicing recording, like actively practicing recording, because it's a different skill set. And I guess I don't know so much for the conducting world what this is like, but certainly in the performing side of things, I have a lot of experience being in a recording session and being the one being recorded, but it wasn't until the pandemic that I was on the other side of it so much. So I think being the recorded person can give you a lot of insight as to what is maybe possible on the other side of things. And engineers in general, and the people that I train up in our audio team, because I'm the manager of the audio team there, the people who excel most are the people who have a performance background and who just have that musical intuition of what sounds good and what should I be doing. So again, that's a roundabout way of answering it. And another time we could talk about the elitism of classical music, but I could talk about that for forever.
I'll just quickly share about my experience with conducting videos. When I started, I'm 39 now, even though I don't look like I'm almost 40. But when I just started applying for schools, like it didn't, as I say, it didn't matter. And then we made, it started with the VHS tapes, and then you would make DVDs and then send it over, and just to pray that there is no different like area code so they can play it. You can just get a string quartet at the beginning, or just like a pianist to have some human reaction to it. And then people would accept small pickup ensemble, and it didn't matter that much because it was hard. So you have recordings with a really loud out of tune horn solos all the time. You can hear the melodies at all, until probably 3-4 years ago. Like a lot of the schools would like they won't tell you, but like the conducting videos with bad audio or with bad orchestra really put you into a disadvantage, because when they are just filling through so many ones, and that make conducting so elite, because not everyone can afford having an orchestra, like going to an expensive workshop and have like practice some nice recording, or they just play everything well for you to look good on a video. But I'm hoping that this pandemic will make things a little more inclusive in a way, because now people are going back and accepting, okay, we understand not everyone has an orchestra, for example, or a full band. So if just five person ensemble, will accept it. So we're kind of going back, we'll see. But I wanted to ask Sarah, so like, what's your experience like as ensemble director? And will you now, like for the next school year or for the next season, how much like the percentage would you continue doing this creative work, which in a way is a lot more work for the conductor to navigate, or that it's much harder for me at least to just go into rehearsal and rehearse it well, but you still have the responsibility of presenting concert in a sense. Like, how would you go about it?
So I've thought about this quite a bit. I think a lot of us, especially who are used to leading in-person ensembles, are asking us, like, coming out of basically adapting everything to virtual platforms, what do we do when we come out the other side? Like, how do we balance it out? Before going into the pandemic, not that we knew it was coming, but I was somebody who was a major proponent of using technology. I am so greatly appreciative of audio engineers and audio editors like you, Natalie, because I pretend to even know like what plugs into what. I have like a whole team of people who take care of all those nuanced things for me. But to your point, I think that to go back to, let's say, like, we'll call it full acoustic, right? 100% acoustic. is in a way kind of ignoring what is a major social cultural part of ourselves, which is technology. I think it would be kind of crazy to ask conductors to suddenly just not have any virtual element or any kind of technological element in their ensembles. Otherwise we wouldn't have like great pieces coming out of, you know, people like Alex Shapiro, who like one of my maiden voyage pieces with technology was Lights Out. And oddly enough, it coming from, so I became director of Manhattan Wind Ensemble in 2014. Prior to that, a lot of the music was pretty standard repertoire, maybe a handful of new pieces, but all of them generally male composers, and not super diverse. So one of my missions was like, okay, we got to branch out a little bit. And one of those was incorporating technology. And I'll be honest, there was some pushback in the beginning from that, because, you know, people, when they sign up for being a part of an ensemble, they're not always interested in, I will say they're more interested in stuff that's a little bit more audience accessible or easy listening, loosely termed, I'll say. But part of what I think was fun for the ensemble is that they hadn't dabbled in any of this before. So going into Lights Out, I don't know if you're familiar with the piece, but it's got a lot of light works, if you will, which is super fun. But Alex, what gravitated me toward that piece specifically was that there's so much room for individual creative input from the various members of the ensemble. So I was like, all right, if people are going to complain about having like their own say in this piece, like, I don't know how to please you. So it ended up being one of the highlights, metaphorically and literally speaking, of the program, because we had people down in the aisles, we had people up on stage, I had a glow in the dark baton. It was like this whole production that everybody had a say in contributing into. So having done that, I think prior to being forced into the situation, I think was helpful, because we had already had a little bit of a taste of it. So coming out of the pandemic, I mean, I would obviously like to see us be doing more in-person stuff. We're not quite there yet. As a not-for-profit organization, we rely on various venues to host us, and some of them are still not permitting that kind of thing yet. So we're doing what we can, but technology is not going away for our ensemble. And in a lot of ways, I think it allows us to stay connected. And I mean, yeah, I guess that's my answer to your question. I don't know if I covered it all the way though, so let me know if there's anything I should.
No, just like of course that's something that's been on my mind a lot too. And so in the fall, I also had to teach an extra ensemble, which is called Technology Ensemble, that was for the music technology major students, mostly graduate students. And they had very total different reaction to activities, like what Alex and Sarah said. Okay, we did free improvisation. We did like improvisation on Zoom, like we use Ting, and also we do composition, we do like graphic score pieces, so they would record their own thing. I did the same exercises for both the traditional orchestra and the technology ensemble, while my orchestra musicians totally struggled. They cannot, I think they are so well trained that they cannot understand the concept that, oh my God, what am I going to do? Now you're showing me a picture, I'm going to make sound. What am I going to do? And that was a total shock. So my ensemble enrollment dropped from from over 100 to 22. So I had only 20 students enrolled back in the spring, because I had this resistance. Okay, we just really want to play Tchaikovsky or Brahms or some new music that's okay, or that's so just kind of wanted to kind of echo, like, I think there is certainly some pushback from both musicians and sometimes administration, because when you don't have some support, and then as a director you need to handle all that technology parts. So just want to like so Alex, how do you see like maybe your projects kind of coming forward, and have you heard from other ensemble directors?
As a composer, I'll tell you, even before electronics got into the picture, for me, the problem has always been improvisation, which has been touched on here. That, as you say, instrumentalists, fine instrumentalists, have had the creativity beaten out of them very early on, from the time they were 6 and starting to play their instrument. Right? They're told, no, 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 you can't do that. That's not right. Right? And so they are terrified of improvising. That's not even technology. When you write let's say a cadenza in a piece as a composer, oh my gosh, it's like a sporting event, just trying to bet on what they're going to manage to do with these blank notes. And I always, of course, end up writing Ossia Inc. for them to play. But I diverge from that, but I want to toss that in because it's relevant. There's so much good material here that both that you and Natalie and Sarah are talking about. Sarah, thank you for saying that you had such a good experience with Lights Out. That's great, despite the pushback. The pushback, by the way, is coming for this very reason I said a moment ago, that because students are not being trained from the get-go to be comfortable with self-expression, whether it's improvising or composing or having fun with electronics. I mean, grab your phone, it's free. You can do all kinds of things on your phone, right? As like on the subway or with the bus when you're going to work. If we don't start them right away from this, of course, they're going to be resistant to it. The good news is that, of course, generationally, as we have more and more students coming into the system at any age who, of course, grew up with smartphones and iPads and everything else, it's going to be less and less of a problem. In 10 years, you're not going to be getting this pushback. I know that sounds like, forever to have to wait, but it's going to be less and less every year. And I can tell you that firsthand because almost all of my catalog, like 97% of my catalog for large ensembles is electroacoustic. And so if I can tell you, I have literally thousands of conductors in my database who play this stuff. And so I always look at that as a great sign that when people say, what about the pushback you get? What about all the people who don't want to do it? And I just say, as any composer would, well, I don't know them. They don't come to me, and that's fine. They don't have to do it. No one's putting a gun to their head saying they have to do it. So I know all the many people around the world who are excited, and we know that's only going to be a growing number. And to this, I want to also point to something very important that Natalie touched on. You were talking about the elitism of classical, quote unquote, concert music. But what concerns me the most is the economic division that you touched on as well. That is huge. Every time I hear about the new advances, I see the price tags, just like with VCRs. When I'm the oldest one here, when I remember when the VCR came out in like 1983 or something, 82, and the thing, it was a tank, it was huge, and it cost like $1,200. It was a lot of money, right? Now you can, they're giving them away. Well, now they're obsolete, obviously, but back, but soon after they became really cheap. And we're in the same place with technology now. We have two issues in front of us for reaching out to musicians, first and foremost, and then, of course, the public, which is access to the affordability of the gear. And the other one is access, of course, to the internet. Now with Starlink and other satellite services coming that are going to serve rural and underserved areas, and hopefully it will be affordable, because that's becomes, and we saw this trying to teach or guest lecture or whatever, during the pandemic, not every kid or student of any age has equal access. And that is a huge thing technically. But the next thing I just want to toss in it's imperative that everybody think about this, whether or not you're technically oriented, is that you cannot ignore what is coming down the pike. Because in a handful of years, we're all going to be completely reliant on something, on a system, on a technology, on a gizmo that right now, we have no idea what it is. If you think back to 13 or 14 years ago when the iPhone came out, that's not very much time. And we saw, if you look forensically back, you can see what led to these various innovations. I can tell you all of this with electronic music, and I certainly with computers and gizmos, it's the same thing. You look at what the expansion of the digital age, which is really what this is, like the industrial age. This is the digital age, the technological age. As it has progressed, you can track and see inklings of how things came. It is our job to immediately It's not the future, it's the present. It's all of our job to become comfortable and knowledgeable about all of it. Even if we don't use all of it, we need to understand artificial intelligence. We need to understand virtual and mixed and augmented realities. We need to understand the power of implants, wearables, the fact that we are soon not going to be holding these stupid bricks that break when we drop them, right? We're going to be, connecting in all kinds of different ways. And that's, I can go on, and I promise I won't. But I wanted to say all of this just to raise everybody's antenna to that, your students and all of us and your ensemble members, if for those of you who are conducting professional ensembles, everybody has got to anticipate this and be ready for it, because it's already happening. It's not going to be an option any more than having a smartphone. The last time you saw someone who didn't have a cell phone, didn't you kind of roll your eyes and you go like, how can you not have a cell phone, right? That's where we're going to quickly be with a lot of other things that might be a little scary right now, but they're going to be such positive, wonderful things for artistic expression and for three-dimensionally, multi-dimensionally engaging our audiences as well as our musicians. So there's a lot there. Yeah. I've stunned you into silence.
No, I think like Natalie says, this is really kind of like an expansion of genre as I see it, because like traditionally this is more like pops or rocks, like people make kind of more popular, not classical or like the elite version concert music with it. But it's kind of also, we have a panel discussion talking about diverse programming and kind of inclusive. How do we be more relevant to our community? This word also came up a lot in the previous session. But for music in general, for any arts form to stay relevant to our community, like as Alex just said, yes, we have kids like not can't afford maybe like reliable internet, but like when they save up some money, they want to get a smartphone first. That's the first thing they want to get, because that's how they stay connected, they stay in the know. So kind of it's a lot like for the industry to think about. Even for Natalie said, okay, how do we teach and train our musicians whose creativity has been beat up, can't improvise and can't, so scared of having to record their own recitals. I'm one of them, I still am. I have because I have all the great students, they're so tired of teaching me how to do this, they would just do it for me. And then, so I just show up and look really poor, say, sorry, I don't know how this works, and then they will figure it out. This is not the best example, but I'm determined to learn all the audio editing thing that Natalie said.
But you are figuring it out. I mean, that's the beauty. Remember, I referred to myself as the hump generation, going from the analog to the digital in my professional career. I started my professional career, with analog, with tape, splicing tape, folks. Oh my gosh, head explodes. So you guys, it's the same thing. You're going from not knowing how to do this to suddenly, wow, I really know how to do this. Everybody has to start at the beginning. I started at the beginning. Everybody starts at the beginning with something. And then it's just knowing that you have that facility to use it, and that it's really not a choice. It's like, seriously, not being able to know how to do these things for a musician coming into the field, as has been said. If you don't know, as you were saying, if you don't know how to record yourself for an audition or do all these things, you're not going to be as viable for a career in the 2020s. It's just the reality of it. So, you're holding a buggy whip and everybody else is driving a car, and an electric car now. So anyway, we all start from somewhere. So nobody should feel ever intimidated or less than, for not knowing how to do something, or having people frustrated at you when you're asking how to do it. This is everybody's job, is to bring each other up and to educate each other and to share and to help, so.
Yeah, I'd love to add on to that. So again, the irony of me working in such a techie thing, and as you keep holding up your iPhone, I have a BlackBerry still because I hate touch screens and I really want a keyboard. And I went years without getting a smartphone. Like if I could live in a cabin in the woods for forever and never talk to anybody, I could live that way. But another, life experience I had, other than being an old soul, is 2019 to 2020, which, so about half of the pandemic, I was an artist in residence at a retirement community here in Bowie, Maryland. And for me, it was great. I mean, I loved it. I love hanging out with older people. I love their wisdom. Personally, I love that you can have a meal with them and they aren't on their phone the whole freaking time. Like, you can have a real conversation without these distractions. So I have very mixed feelings about technology. There's wonderful things, but there's things that I really despise. And especially in this retirement community, the average age of entry was 74. So a lot of them were very resentful of technology too. But one of the things I did after everything shut down, because this was in March and I was still doing programming in the first month that this happened. Instead of doing music programming, I just sent an email blast, and like in their newsletter, because a lot of them don't use email, their print newsletter, I just asked people to give me a call if they needed help, you know, learning how to use Zoom, and I recorded tutorials for them on how to set up a Facebook account so that they could, you know, use Facebook video to talk to their family. Also, this community was weird that there was no cell phone service just because of geography, so we could only use internet. It was strange. So I think it's so easy to be overwhelmed. I feel overwhelmed every time I try a new technology thing. Every time I open Adobe Premiere, I'm looking at it and it's so much to look at. But what I know I'm capable. I know I'm capable of doing it. I just need somebody to have the patience and the time to just tell me, and I'll be that person who writes it down on a piece of paper of the steps to do. And then once I get better at it, it's fine. And then I'll teach somebody else how to do it. So if everybody can, well, first of all, we got to get over ourselves of feeling intimidated. And hopefully there's somebody in your life that you like trust and can be kind of vulnerable with. I felt very sorry for our faculty in a lot of ways at certain places who I think felt like they didn't want to let on that they didn't know how to do a thing. But the reality is, like, 19-year-olds probably know how to do these kinds of things better than their professors. And that's a very vulnerable and awkward place to be. So if we can all treat each other as if you're trying to help your 85-year-old grandmother get connected to their grandchildren or do something like that, and just like having a lot of grace and patience, and never want to make anybody feel little for not, it's like knowing anything, you know, people are going to be vulnerable for such a long time. Yeah, that's all I wanted to say about it. If you're overwhelmed, write to me. I'll teach you, because there's nothing worse than feeling like you can't, like you don't want to be vulnerable and reach out, and then you're just stuck in this position of not knowing, and you're overwhelmed. And we can help each other sift through the weeds. This conference is great, and there's a great support network here of people that can be tapped into for Facebook chats or Zoom calls, or, you know, pen and paper letters if that's how you would like your instructions written out. That's all I was going to add to that.
I'm just curious, has in the conducting community, has anybody done either a short little web series or a set of YouTube videos geared toward concert musicians and technology? Because as was said before, I forget who said it, but you know, a lot of what you see on YouTube is pop oriented and film music oriented, which is fine. The concepts are the same, but people can relate to it more if it's, you know, if it's their peers talking about it. Has that been done? Because if it hasn't been done, we should do it.
I think one problem or one concerns that I saw is at the beginning when pandemic hit, we didn't know how much that was going to last. So all we were trying to do was to reproduce what we were doing, but kind of remotely. So a lot of my conducting friends kind of rush into editing all these things. So we are still putting together video of Sibelius Second Symphony, for example, or a Tchaikovsky piece or a Brahms, just like play to click tracks. So we are trying to reproduce what we were doing, just with different methods, until when we suddenly realized, no, this pandemic is longer and we can continue doing it because it's really a lot of time. And if you were at the concert hour last night, Tiffany Chen shared the project that he did at Albling, which is a collaboration with University of Rochester with the conductor, Rachel Waddell. So like they spend hours and hours and hours editing, putting all these faces together, and it became so daunting and so far away from our music making goals in a sense. And then people started to kind of outsource them. So I don't feel, at least from like my friends, I know like there are tutorials to do that, but people are feeling really feeling the Zoom editing fatigue now. Yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to say. Sarah, did you want to say something? Yes.
Sure. Actually, one of my colleagues at the elementary level and I have been like referring to the boom of the virtual course, virtual band is like kind of like the Frankenstein monster version of what you would normally do in person. So I think at the beginning of the pandemic, when everybody was just like, how do we still make music together? That was the already tried and tested kind of method of doing that, the like Eric Whitaker, Luke Sarunque thing. But one of the things that I think is important to acknowledge about that is that I don't think when like Whitaker started that virtual course, it's like, oh, look at this cool digital sort of like modified version of an in-person thing that I did. It was like, look at this really neat thing that connected people globally and musically. So I think with that kind of at the center of at least people keeping people making music at the beginning of the pandemic, I think that that was what people were familiar with. And I'll tell you what, myself included, YouTube really helped me through how to navigate the crazy like platform of Adobe Premiere Pro. I watched so many tutorial videos with how to edit this, how to put in a grid. Oh my Lord. I think the grid itself took me longer than the actual video editing. But with that, I think that could be, and has been for many people, very overwhelming. And we adapted by necessity. But now that things have kind of like, you know, tapered out a little bit, I think my advice to anybody who's looking into incorporating more technology or at least dabbling is to just start with what you're comfortable with. One of the very first things I did with Manhattan Wind Ensemble was having an electric guitar soloist, and like that was my technology for that concert program. You know, my husband's an electric guitar player. I was like, hey, what happens if I have you come play with the band? Let's see what happens. And we had a bass player, we had a drum set player. It ended up being this whole piece that people were, you know, still kind of unfamiliar with how to respond to and navigate playing with an electronic instrument. And then we did lights out, and having an electronic track, that was like a whole nother level. But it becomes a metamorphosis. You just kind of take one little thing, do what you're comfortable with. Maybe it's a BlackBerry and a typing keyboard, and then you go from there. If you're trying to like have a certain goal, like maybe your goal is to make like a wee video chorus video or something like that, then start smaller. Start with the YouTube tutorial, start with asking, like Natalie said, the wealth of resources that you have just at the tip of your fingers. I'll say broadly the internet, but the wonderful people on this conference, and, you know, ask your friends. You'd be surprised like how many of your colleagues already know how to do these things, or even students, like Chaowen said, that might know how to navigate these things better than you do because it's been a part of their life from beginning until now. So yeah, that's what I want to say to that.
And I just want to toss in that Heather raised a point, a couple of pops up on the chat here, that, you know, being concerned of sort of, you know, that balance between live and what we all kind of grew up and have been trained and love to want to do, which certainly doesn't go away, and the technological. And all I can say, and I know everybody would say the same thing, it's not either or, it's both. And it doesn't, and you can certainly do a traditional acoustic piece and then do something with more technology, and then do something more traditional, and then something with different kinds of tech and multimedia on the same concert. Just the same way I think it's great to have concerts with different genres on them. So it's don't think, just for all of you who are getting your feet wet, never think that it's either or, like you're being shoved into the deep end of the pool, never to emerge again. You know, you're going to sink to the bottom and it's going to be miserable. Like we all love, of course, we're human. We love our sternums getting bent by the, you know, push of the sound waves against us. That's why we do this. So it's both. And it's just a matter of getting comfortable. And I love what Sarah was saying about doing it in increments, you know, smaller increments.
Yeah, I can say at least at Arts Laureate, because now we've seen a full year of clients come through the door. Because I think I was maybe the second person who got hired on to start this new whatever is about to happen. And watching our return clients especially transform, and like also hearing students' progress is amazing to be able to see how everybody's figuring it out. And you know, a group that we edited for in November and then in March, we can hear a market improvement. Two things that I wrote down as you were talking of ways that I've seen conductors adapt to this and be able to find something that's maybe musically fulfilling that will also get you a reasonable recording and experience is a lot of people adapting flex band pieces, and more people than I would expect utilizing music by living composers, because it's a lot easier to just be like, hey, would you rewrite this and change this one instrument to violin or whatever, or even being able, you know, when we make our guide tracks, if it's been digitally engraved, we can find that source engraving file and just print out a MIDI copy of it so that we can make a guide that, even though it's not the most musically and artistically fulfilling, it's a way to get people oriented and maybe closer to what the practice experience normally is, because you're trying to be very metronomic and do those things. But that's one way to kind of adapt, especially for small ensembles, when you're like, we just don't have a lot of repertoire to choose from anyway, and now we also have to record virtually. It's a whole other layer. What I've seen emerge in like the last 2 months, as a couple places have opened up, maybe in certain parts of the country before others, certainly not in Maryland, nothing's opened up here, of groups that are able to meet in person, but maybe only a subset. So their band is meeting, but only 10 people from the band. So they'll do things like record class A, B, and C, and everybody uses the guide. The conductor listens to the guide. Cohort A records, and then at 4 o'clock, you know, cohort B, and the next day cohort C, and then you smush those 3 recordings together. Now you can't do as granular audio editing in terms of syncing things up, but it's a way to get everybody in the same recording in that way. Or we've had situations where, again, recording in your band room or orchestra room with a smaller group of people, but maybe there's people who haven't been able to come back to campus, like international students in particular, who had to fly home and who have never been able to come back. And so then they will record on what we would call a virtual ensemble submission of just them themselves, and we mix them in. Just yesterday, I was working on a piece that is a live performance recording from maybe even a few years ago, that they also then had their 40-person choir record a virtual choir edit to, and then they get mixed together. So these are just some of the ways that people are finding out, okay, well, how can we maybe even repurpose something we've done before, so that even though we can't, we have various, you know, financial, geographic, internet barriers, how can we still be providing art and the educational experience to people that we want to be providing? So especially if you have ideas of ways you can do more hybrid things, I'd love to hear them. I think it's great to know, and I would love to see one of the trends become leaning more on living composers. And somebody was saying earlier about how we get the creativity beaten out of us as performers and those kind of, because we're told, you know, to be on this really strict path. And to be fair, a lot of it is because, especially in an undergraduate curriculum, you have to leave that 4-year degree knowing all the standards, just to even prepare yourself for orchestral auditions and those kinds of things. Like, it's the bare minimum. We can't change the fact yet that the classical music world is still so stuck on all of those standards and traditions. And I'm not saying those are bad. There's a time and place for everything, but we should also be adding and reinvigorating the curriculum with new things. So I kind of hope that this pushes people more into the new music, although don't call it that, then people will say, I don't want it, but new music and working with living composers. And I also hope living women composers to do things that are innovative and truly collaborate, or just revive and rework pieces that already exist to fit this context. And I'm not, you know, the panel, I'm not leading the panel, but I would be curious, Alex, what your experience has been. Has anybody written to you and said, like, can you adapt this for what we're doing now? Or how many people even reach out? I really don't know on the composer side.
Yeah, well, actually, this is great. I want to turn everybody here on to something really cool, a great resource that didn't exist a year ago, which is something called the Creative Repertoire Initiative. Maybe a few of you have heard of it. Basically, in April, when we realized this pandemic is going to be going on between April and May, it's going to be going on a while. A number of composers, most of us particularly well known in the band world, got together, about 10 of us. You would probably know everybody's names. And we formed, you go to creativerepertoire.com is the website. We formed a group along with Robert Ambrose, a conductor, and Alan McMurray at the time. And we formed a group called Creative Repertoire Initiative, which had two purposes: knowing that ensemble directors are going to have completely variable personnel. They're not going to know if 3 ferrets playing kazoos are going to be walking in one day and 7 bassoonists the next day, right? And so we took it upon ourselves to all start creating adaptable, flex, ultraflex, cell-based, adaptable, whatever, multi-part pieces. And most importantly, with the greatest impact, we formed a Facebook group, which now has about 54 or more hundred members, 5,500 members, called the Creative Repertoire Initiative Group, whatever. And what we did with the Facebook group was we got conductors and composers together, and we encouraged composers from all over to write material that's flex and adaptable. If you want to know the difference in the terminology, it's all on the creativerepertoire.com website. But check it out. Thanks for putting up the link, Chaowen. Check it out because it's an amazing resource. And this is exactly what happened. And even in my flex pieces, for instance, I've done 3 this year, in addition to the big standard ones for big ensembles. But 3 of the flexible ones, I didn't happen to have harp in any of them because that doesn't tend to be standard. But I was asked in a couple of instances, gee, could you do something for the harpist, or what can we do? This is just it. Living composers are responsive. Sousa will never return an email, ever, okay? Ever. He will never make a change. We will always make changes and adapt. So I call it, I agree, new music unfortunately has a terrible stigma to it, just the music of one's time, the living music around us. This is, back in, just remind people, in Beethoven's day, if there wasn't a new piece on the program every time, people would throw tomatoes. I mean, they were pissed. They wanted a new piece all the time. Something broke down in the 20th century, which is a whole nother discussion. But anyway, it's very exciting to see all the composers who have risen to the cause to create music that, especially with bands now being essentially a year behind in terms of where their students are, having lost a year, they're still going to be needing a lot of flexibility. So there's a lot of that out there. And I, of course, have been encouraging a lot of people to write electroacoustic pieces, because that track is so helpful, not only for the musician being able to feel like they're having some kind of musical experience as they're laying down their track, but very importantly, and something that Natalie didn't really touch on, but it's a huge problem, intonation and pitch. Because when you have everybody, you're in an ensemble room together, you're all tuning to each other. One of the great joys of a large ensemble. Everybody recording in their bedroom, oh my gosh, the concept of where A440 is or isn't, is all over the map. And that becomes not the most pleasant thing in a recording project. Because remember, these aren't performances, these are all recording projects, and need to be, just thought of in that term. So.
Oh yeah, you just described my whole job.
Yeah.
Of fixing things, the problems of recording in a vacuum. And even for the most pro groups, it's things that you would converge on as a performer in articulation and length and sustain and intonation, all these things, if you were with your cohort, but you just can't do it in a vacuum.
Hey.
And that's the kind of thing that we're tidying up. Does somebody have a question?
Yeah, I think just really intonation and timing. That's what my students were complaining the most, because we started with sound trap. So with it, and we even experiment, okay, so for the stretch of 3 bars, how are we going to make it? It's usually so easy. We just kind of look at each other and then we stretch and breathe together and go on. And we try to create a stretch out, count out, click. Nothing worked. And then we finally got together, and we did it in 1 take. And everybody was like, oh. But just I wanted to respond to what Heather said, and then also it's maybe 10 minutes ago, there was a conversation about finding maybe a balance between that, because I think my institution is a little bit different or unique in a way that I teach at a technology institution. So my students, even before pandemic, we have, every year we have about 1,000 students coming into all different kinds of musical ensembles, from bands to choir to orchestra to jazz ensembles. And one request is they don't want anything to do with technology, because that's their daily life. and they want to come here and just to express themselves, to feel the emotions. They don't want to think anything about technology. They're just like, they're okay doing new music when it's sounding okay, when it's not too atonal, when there's not a lot of rhythmic displacement. But as kind of we've been discussing, and as I see it, I just see it as like a fifth genre that I always do. So like I mix a little bit Baroque and film, or like maybe Disney and some classical, some romantic, and then I add a little bit of this experimental, or like not new, but kind of music of our time. But with training, people really get better with it. And then it's like Sarah said, just kind of do to the degree that you're comfortable with. Like, so if it's just like maybe one project, 3 minutes piece, that for some students that can't participate, it's okay if you can afford doing it much longer and spend more time doing free improvisation, practice exercises, or bringing composers to flex ensemble pieces. That's awesome. If not, then it's totally okay. Just have that in the back of your mind, and then know that there are a lot of resources. So when you're looking to include those into your curriculum or ensemble, your programming, you know it's there. Yeah.
Yeah, and if I could piggyback off of that, I think that that's probably a very relatable feeling for everybody, seeing that we're all looking at a screen right now, and have probably been doing that for the better part of our work days, if not longer, for over a year now. By the time I'm done teaching, I want nothing to do with any screen. I want to just play with my dog, read a book, you know, craft something that is just hands-on and tactile, that is not on a screen. And I'm sure a lot of us are feeling the same way. And I would not be surprised if we'll call post-pandemic, and that everything's back to quote unquote normal, not talking about psychological, mental, emotional, those kinds of things, just like physical normal. I can't imagine there's not going to be some kind of a detox period, right? Where people really feel like they just want to pull away from the technology for a little bit, and then like slowly incorporate it back into what was pre-pandemic normal. I know as a community band director, I don't have the luxury of just programming whatever I want all the time and being like, oh, technology is so important, let's do all these different pre-recorded tracks. And I really have to be mindful of the membership and keeping their interest. So it is a balance, like you were saying, Chaowen. You really want to do stuff that's, you know, some people do want to play the Grangers and the Tekelis and the Mackey and the Holst. And that's important too. That's an important part of, at least from a band perspective, that's an important part of our history. But there's a whole future in front of us. There's some really wonderful composers who are writing incredible new music right now, who are really taking new spins on things, who are pushing the boundaries of music. Those are important too. And as we're all here to do, we're all here to perpetuate the marginalized demographics, right? So, which is also important too, because that is not represented in the history of, we'll call it concert music. And so it eventually, it's not going to be just like, oh, suddenly it's all going to be magically perfectly balanced. There's going to be a dance. It's going to be a dance. There's going to be a little bit of incorporating more maybe electronic pieces in your programming, or maybe it's, just maybe we do something. I'll give you a really cool example, actually. I'm a clarinetist and a pianist, but I was playing clarinet in a concert back in, it was maybe like 4 or 5 months ago, where it was a very limited ensemble within a space where we were able to be spread out 6 feet apart. We all had our own microphones we were recording, and that was a whole sound editing thing. Again, Natalie, kudos to you, because I cannot pretend to know the first thing about that. But it was also broadcast on Facebook Live, and in the center of the ensemble, they had 2 show hosts who were on Facebook Live taking live questions from people who were the audience at home, because that's the other element, right? Like, yeah, we can get these bands back together again, choruses back together again. Well, where's the audience going to go? That's the whole other element, right? So it was really neat that in between the pieces, the conductor would go sit down with the two show hosts and they would discuss the piece that was just played, even down to in between Holst movements on the first suite. With, I know if like any band people are like, what do you mean you chopped up the whole suite? So it was really cool to have that element of like live audience input, even though they weren't physically there. So people really have gotten very creative, and even post-pandemic, I can totally see myself taking on a project like that, because look how many people you're reaching. You know, if you're gonna take on the mission of, you know, spreading the word about this person's music and, you know, this guest composer, this guest conductor, like, why not reach everybody? You know, why not stretch your arms beyond the walls of the concert hall?
Yeah,
I couldn't agree. Oh, sorry.
Well, I was gonna say, so I mentioned I was that artist in residence at the retirement community during that last year. And so at the time, nobody could leave. The campus was literally locked down as the Maryland mandate. And the only way we could reach each other was through the in-house resident TV channel. So from March to August, I put on 46 events, and 35 of them I either performed or presented myself. So it was a lot of this kind of feeling of like, well, how can I make this hybrid or interesting or different? I think even when we do go back to fully on live, in-person, physical, whatever, I hope we definitely keep the live streaming and recording of all events, because why would we give up that global reach when we have that option now? And the ability to do things like live Facebook questions. So I would do that. I would do my solo clarinet. They heard so much solo clarinet that summer, I'll tell you what. So I would do these solo clarinet recitals where I did program notes, and in between pieces, I would come over and check like the Facebook live feed and answer any questions that came into the chat. And I did, you know, like a lecture on clarinet reeds and how to adjust them and extended techniques on clarinet. So people could still engage that way. And I do love that part of it. I really hope we continue to do that.
Yep, I couldn't agree more. The most important thing forever for composers is recordings, by the way. That's nothing new. And interaction, of course, was happening in all kinds of creative concerts before the pandemic, but now it's multifold. And the other element is the audiences themselves. There's been a huge shift now. Audiences really do kind of like, not instead of going to a concert, okay? It's not either or, it's both. But they really like being able to pour themselves a drink, sit back in their chair, put their feet up on the desk, and, you know, listen to a concert on their own terms, right? And not have to sit still in a seat, not have to get dressed up, not have to spend for the babysitter, not have to worry about the noise they'll make when they turn the program, right? This is an age, like whether we like it or not, it's an age of many distractions and an age of a whole large group of people that really doesn't sit still, and that's not their culture. And when you think about traditional concert music culture, which is really the Western European culture of the past, it is a stultified, it has worth, but it is a stultified kind of event that is not particularly relevant to the way people actually live these days. So when you ask somebody, it's not so much that they don't necessarily even want to hear classical music or traditional music. It's more like they would have, and I'm one of these people too, I'll have more fun at a jazz club where I can have a beer and sit back and relax and clap during a solo, you know, after a solo or something, and just be part and interactive than I will, even as a composer, since sitting at a symphony concert and being really quiet as a mouse and it not being cool to move. So that's a whole nother discussion, right? This whole thing of you know, changing the concert culture, but it's really relevant in terms of technology, because we now have, whether we wanted it or not, we have 1.5 years of audiences enjoying watching from afar and from their desks and living rooms.
I did a wind quintet concert where we all just said, you know, everybody's going to be on their phone in the concert. That's just life now. So we made a custom Snapchat filter of like our 5 faces, and we invited people in the concert to Snapchat our stuff. So that was a fun example.
I have a similar example from years ago. I think it was Ken Thompson did a performance of my first symphony for winds and called Immersion, which the third movement features a humpback whale and all that. And he had this thing, live time tweeting, and I happened to be able to attend the concert, which was in the Midwest, and I was here on the West Coast. And they had set up during moments of the piece, all kinds of little bits of info, silent info, of course, pictures and stuff that would come up during the piece that people were invited to watch their phones. And the composer was able to also chime in and put in links and little bits of private information about something that was valuable to the audience during it, making it a very interactive, multi-dimensional experience. And this was years before last year. So I totally agree. I mean, we want to use these tools to engage the musicians and engage the audiences. It's not hard.
Yeah, my last concert before everything shut down was we did the Georgia premiere of Stella Soul's Oceana, and so she wrote this piece to raise marine noise pollution awareness. So she developed an app with marine animal sound. So at one point, me as a conductor's job was to cue all the audience, so they could get on the app, download it, and so they can be the whale or the fish and everything. So I think that's something that's really cool. But kind of from the other side of it, from my association with a lot of the kind of the middle-sized professional orchestras or even community orchestras, they are really struggling in that sense, because while we are all sitting at home watching Free Met or Berlin Philharmonic, they are really struggling to find an audience. And then when you're not going into the concert hall, there's that connection is missing. It's like you're not supporting your local, like Alex said, it's totally different watching a jazz show from going to the club and have a beer and just check things out with others. So I know this probably for another conversation, but we are really fighting with Netflix, with HBO, the Friends reunion, and all that things while you're putting up new flute premiere and just checking out about all the different amateurs of different wind instruments, for example.
And the other issue is going to be monetization. That's the elephant in the room too, because I'm on the board of ASCAP, by the way. So I deal with this in a very upfront way on a regular basis about how musicians, performers, et cetera, are not getting paid. Composers, publishers are not getting the money that they deserve because of the way the digital age kind of stupidly snuck up on people when it shouldn't have. Everybody should have known what was coming down the pike, and they didn't pay attention. So that water, that ship has sailed. It's been 25 years. And now we are dealing with a very frustrating situation of when we put on these events, which whether they're live or digital, doesn't matter. They cost money, they cost time, they take a lot of effort, a lot of people that all deserve to be compensated. How do we creatively monetize them? How do we ensure that people want to pay for the experience in a culture where they're so used to just sitting back and getting everything for free? So yet again, that's another good topic for conversation, but it's something to think about.
So we're saying we should all get together for a virtual beer after this and have those conversations after. Because I could rant about that for forever.
We are about 10 minutes away from the end of this session, so I wanted to make sure that we address any questions or comments from our audience here. So if you have any thoughts, you can raise your digital hand or physical hands that we can cue you to ask questions or share your comments, or just to unmute yourself. Or the four of us can continue chatting. I'm a conductor, I just talk.
I'd be really curious to hear from the attendees, the people who haven't been speaking, your experiences. I'm sure some of you do have experiences and thoughts about the future. Feel free to unmute yourselves and chat with us.
I think I'll go for it. First of all, thank you so much. This was amazing to hear from all of you. You are so professionals and at the same time such a genuine persons who are very eager to help and share, and thank you very much for that. I'm still a student at undergraduate level, and like last year when I finally started conducting, that was the time when like pandemic hit. So for me it was really strange to just like stay by myself and like continue studying scores and like not just give up the whole career dream. And I was wondering from your point of view, like how can conductors' mindsets switch to the technological part? Like how can conductor become a technological conductor, if that makes sense? Like what are similarities and differences in terms of like um, being technologically friendly as a conductor in the future? Like what are the best things to do if you have any insights?
For me to chime in on, I suppose. I think it just kind of has to go along with what you're curious about. Like for me, I think technology and music peaked for me when I got really into Steve Reich's music and the concept of phasing. And there are a lot of composers who I love that are writing kind of like phasing type techniques in their music. So like, for example, Joanne Harris wrote this piece called The Lighthouse, which gives the concept of the light moving around. And so there's like this phasing aspect. And I'm like, oh, this is so cool that somehow we've got band instruments now emulating technological instruments and computer sounds, which is really cool. And they're like, that kind of launched me into being curious about actually using physical technology. And one piece, I just did like one piece per program, every other program. I just like, one time I did a Chaos Theory by Jim Bonney, who was actually a video game composer, and featured my husband on electric guitar. And so we just did a little bit of that. There was another piece too that featured some synthesizer stuff, To Walk with Wings by Julie Giroux. And then, like I said before, we kind of hopped over into Lights Out, which was like a for sure launch into using tech as an element of the music. And so it's actually, for me, it was more just curiosity based. I'm like, what if we throw in this non-acoustical element, this unrelenting click track that everyone is kind of beholden to? And that was like a foreign frontier for everybody to kind of navigate together, myself included. So it ended up being kind of a fun experience for all of us to do together. I had never conducted with a click track before. You know, conducting teachers will always tell you never conduct with a recording, but like this is not quite the same thing, right? So if you're looking to just kind of dabble in it, I would start just by listening to some recordings of composers who you know, like Alex Shapiro, who are writing really cool stuff for that are made for acoustic ensembles but have an electric element in it. It is its own instrument in its own right, and if it's the infinite library of sounds instrument, which is really it can be overwhelming, but thankfully we have composers who make a lot of those decisions for us. But with that too, it becomes a really fun journey to get inside the composer's head and learn the intent of why they decided to make some of the sound choices that they made, the rhythmic choices that they made. And oftentimes a lot of it speaks to kind of where they believe music is going, and embracing the fact that the internet's not going anywhere. Technology is always going to be advancing, and why not make that another instrument in the ensemble?
And I just want to chime in for 2 seconds on that, because I love what Sarah's saying about this, that first of all, for you as conductors, many times, I can only speak for myself. I'm not going to speak for my other peers who write EA music, electroacoustic music, but I will often do what we call in film music a variable click. In other words, you're building in rubato, you're building in time and space. If it's a groove piece, you would be playing that pretty much, to the tempo with or without a click, right? If it's a piece like Lights Out or something, that's an up-tempo thing. But other things that are tone poems do have what we call variable clicks. So don't be afraid, conductors, that you're going to be hemmed in, especially with a living composer. You can always call up the living composer and say, you know what, bar 53, I'm feeling more of a pause there. Can you adjust that in the click and in the track? Of course we can. So there's that collaboration that happens. It's almost like being on the podium. If I were standing, well, for instance, Cynthia Johnston Turner, the great Cynthia, is going to be premiering my 4-movement symphony next month at National Intercollegiate Band, and I'm going to be there in Grand Rapids. And she and I, of course, will be collaborating, and I'll be sitting there and listening. The first movement is acoustic, but the other 3 movements are electroacoustic. And it's going to be that same process of, does it need more air here, a little more time there, right? It's no different. As Sarah was saying, the electronic track for many composers, certainly for me, is an equal and additional section of the band, just like woodwinds or brass or anything else. It has sound, the composer's using sounds that we can't get from the live instruments, and that's the beauty of it. And as Sarah said, it's an endless candy shop of sounds. It's just endless, and that's what's so compelling about it. So I just wanted to toss that in, that don't be afraid, for those of you who haven't done EA pieces before, of having a click in your ear, because especially with a living composer, it can work just fine, and you get comfortable to it. Soon you don't really hear the click, because you know the piece and the track so well, and you're just conducting as it feels, as it should feel.
Yeah, at Art Florida, I would guess that 90% of the pieces that are recorded have some sort of variable click. Like, they aren't a backing track, they aren't something like that. We get a reference recording and we make a click to it. So they're often very musical. And then we kind of work as a conductor. I've made many click tracks of feeling like, okay, if I were a conductor, would I subdivide this beat? Because I'm also a performer, and I'm thinking, okay, would I be able to follow this without a visual cue? So yeah, I hope nobody's daunted by that. And as Alex already mentioned, being able to collaborate with living composers.
And some composers are kind of like, oh, sorry, Chaowen. If I just add one last thing. I can just speak for at least one person. My good friend, Michael Markowski, just wrote a piece called Drawing Mars, I believe. And if you go onto his website, there's this whole slew of supplementary videos that go along with the piece. I believe it was a middle school commission, but there's a whole video of him discussing and talking about the piece. Then there's a whole other video of this very multi-layered video that's a click track. There's like major section markings. There's the soprano singing in it. It's this whole multi-level thing where, like, let's say in a situation, this particular middle school was rehearsing from home and they still wanted to do some kind of an ensemble piece. And so, while Michael's background is in film, so I think that was something that he was very comfortable doing. It might seem like a bit of a daunting task for, somebody who's maybe just dabbling in that kind of thing. But, for Michael, he's the composer of this piece. Like Alex was saying, these are living composers who are willing to make adjustments or make complete extra resources so that we have more better access to their music and can better achieve their vision of the music.
I think all my colleagues say it's great things, and I completely agree with all of it. I just have a couple things to add. I think the first important thing is you have to genuinely interested in the music and the technology part of it. Don't feel that, okay, this is a new thing, this is a new cool thing, I have to be a conductor knowing technology. So you force yourself to learn the things when you're not interested or passionate about, because when it's not genuine and not authentic, people know it immediately. So just don't think that's okay, that's something you have to do, but just broaden your repertoire database, or like your bank. Listen to a lot of music and find something that's really interesting. Okay, that's a cool song, or that's something interesting, but I don't really like it. That's totally okay. You don't have to like everything, or like even to like the big names. It's totally okay, but find something that you genuinely are appealed to. And in addition, I always advise people, in addition to have like watching recordings, see if you can find the score, see how because that's what your main source of it's only once, I should say, like the score is only one edition of the music, the creation of the composer's work, but it would be your kind of main source as a conductor. And it's sometimes hard to find, but just get in touch with the composers. They are usually very happy if someone is interested in their music. So like kind of see if you can see how this things is presented on page. That will help you get the idea of how they organize sound, how things are structured, and just talk to composers. And that will be maybe like your niche, becoming like a new composer, or no, like the champion of a certain type of music. Then like when people think about it, it's okay, you'll be the expert of knowing it. But don't do it if you don't genuinely enjoy it. It's not worth it, really.
Those are really wise words, Chaowen. And I just want to say, as a composer here, there are probably others in the audience. It has been conductors who were the champions of my music that got it out into the world, and that helped me build my career. It was, composers are completely reliant on conductors to, dig what we do, resonate with what we do, and bring it to people. And so we are composers are forever grateful and forever available, as Sarah was saying, and as you're saying, to give resources and to help with everything to the best of our ability.
We have 1 minute left. I know like we conductors don't always have the right, as Sarah said, to choose what we want to play or what should be programmed. And of course, you're in love with a piece that you're currently working on, but really just like kind of like authenticity is the most important thing. And I just want to make sure that my fellow panelists have a way to, no, we need to go back to the main room. But thank you so much for joining me, and we will take a short break after the sessions, and then we'll be coming back. But first, coming back to the main room. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
We will be starting the next session at, let's see,